Robbie Martin was in 3rd grade when it all happened. She belonged to a black community living in the town called Rosewood. She used to play in her Aunt Sarah's yard every Sunday after they came back from church. Robbie was especially fond of the plum trees in her backyard, but who knew she would be the one watching them burn? Robbie was one of the lucky survivors from the Rosewood Massacre, a tale as old as a century, but sadly never spoken of. The town of Rosewood had to suffer an intolerable tragedy that took place in 1923, but it was very well hidden until 40 years ago, when it was truly publicized and shed light upon. Robbie was awakened in a frenzy by her father, who commanded her to put on as heavy clothing as possible. Bewildered and scared, Robbie did as she was told. She remembered that desperately cold night when her father told her that they had to get out of Rosewood and that people were being shut down. A child as young as Robbie couldn't quite grasp the situation. All that she knew was that she had to run. She could smell the smoke and hear the gunshots as her body shivered from dread. And she ran as fast as she could, never looking back at that god-forsaken town until she reached the train station that would transport her to safety. Robbie was one of the very few survivors of the Rosewood Massacre that lived long enough to tell the tale. Rosewood was an isolated village in a sparsely populated pine and oak forested area of Florida at the beginning of the 20th century. The area's abundance of red cedars, which were harvested to create pencils, gave rise to the name. The Levy County neighborhood had about 26 households in 1920. 4 of the residents were white, while 22 belonged to black families, according to census figures. There were roughly 100 people living in the town. The Rosewood Massacre occurred in 1923, an attack on Rosewood, Florida, which had a substantial African American population, by numerous white aggressors. By the time the conflict ended, the town had been completely devastated, and its inhabitants had been permanently evicted. The tale was mostly disregarded until the 1980s, when it was finally resurrected and made popular. The rumor that a white woman named Fannie Taylor was allegedly sexually abused by a black man in her residence in a neighboring community sparked the slaughter. In Rosewood, a gang of white men convened to apprehend the rapist they thought was a freshly freed prisoner called Jesse Hunter. Racial tensions in Rosewood had been rising before this incident as a result of a string of incidents. A white Perry schoolteacher had been murdered in the previous winter, and Rosewood's neighbor Gainesville hosted a Ku Klux Klan gathering on New Year's Eve in 1922. Following Taylor's accusation, white males started looking for Jesse Hunter, as well as suspected collaborators Aaron Carrier and Sam Carter. Carter suffered a lynching, while Carrier was apprehended and imprisoned. The white mob believed Sylvester, a Rosewood citizen and the cousin of Aaron Carrier, was hiding Jesse Hunter. A group of 20 to 30 white guys invaded the Carrier home on January 4, 1923, and shot their family's dog. They assassinated Sarah, Sylvester's mother, when she approached the front door and encountered the mob. In the subsequent conflict, Sylvester protected his home, executing 2 attackers and injuring 4 others before being assassinated himself. Many of Rosewood's African American residents had previously sought shelter in the marshes when the surviving victims fled there, seeking to escape the escalating conflict and growing racial hostility. The white mob destroyed the Carrier residence the following day, before uniting with 200 men from nearby towns who had falsely been informed that a black guy had murdered 2 white men. As darkness fell, the crowd invaded the settlement, killing animals and setting structures on fire. A formal report states that 2 white people and 6 black people were slain. Other reports point to a higher figure. Only a house and the local general store were the only structures standing after the tragedy. The mob set fire to homes over the period of 7 days, fired at locals, and even sexually assaulted a lady. During the Rosewood Massacre, at least 6 black individuals and 2 white persons perished. However, despite the fact that the number of fatalities is still officially 8, other estimates place the death toll as high as 200. The remaining citizens were expelled from the town and would never return. Despite how horrific the slaughter was, the news quickly stopped after the bloodshed stopped. And until 1982, when a reporter for the St. Petersburg Times released an exposé, it was virtually buried. Many surviving victims were in their 80s and 90s by the time the tale gained widespread attention. However, it did not deter them from sharing their stories and calling for compensation from the government of Florida. The precise number of fatalities in the Rosewood Massacre is unknown. 6 black individuals and 2 white persons were among the confirmed fatalities, but survivors claim that the actual number of fatalities was likely much higher. In either case, the accounts of rape, murder, and other acts of violence were quite upsetting. According to later investigations, Taylor may have been hallucinating or had invented an assault by a white lover in order to conceal her illicit relationship from her spouse. However, the town's initial response was to accept the bogus claim and act without delay. According to Moore, a journalist, the number of fatalities is categorically 8 based on his many years of investigation, which included interviews with the survivors and analysis of archived data. That includes the 6 black persons who had done nothing to provoke the violence and the 2 white males that fell on the carrier's front door while attempting to break in. A few of the black Rosewood inhabitants who had fled managed to board a passing train and travel north to Gainesville. Some went even further, relocating to Chicago or New York after leaving the state. A prosecutor called a grand jury to look into what happened just 1 month after the shooting. After only 1 day, the grand jury declared its job complete, stating it had been unable to locate any credible eyewitnesses. There have been countless incidents where white people were never held accountable for spinning lies and erasing black communities through methods more than one. No person, regardless of being white or black or any other color of skin, should have to suffer inhuman treatment and injustice. The Rosewood Massacre was the prime example of how the whites have been committing injustice to black communities without ever being held accountable for it. If you agree with this, then drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep you updated about such incidents from history and emerging. If you have any suggestions or key information, let us know in the comments below.